when Sue sent out the missive, I swallowed hard and said I would participate, and I didn't say two words when somebody nominated me to be chairman, which was a terrible mistake.
Yes, I can identify.
And they've done that.
Yeah.
So we worked for the last 6 months or so. I knew from my experience in Ohio that you have to look at what the resources are in terms of the agencies that control the data and have professional expertise and so forth. So I asked around, and we were able to plug into Steve Schneider at the Sunapee Upper Valley Regional Planning. Met with Julia Griffin, who I know from Hanover Rotary. She's a city manager from Hanover. Met, and her name escapes me. We had a meeting at Dow's with the Chamber of Commerce lady from Hanover. Met with Ann Duncan Cooley on several occasions. And you may recall was a selectman up in Orford. She was in charge of one of the housing agencies at one point in career. She's an attorney. She used to live on the green here in Lyme. She's very helpful. We interacted with UNH Extension. They have some resources up there. And let's see, and then we met, one of the public officials suggested several consultants, one of whom we met with a couple times, Stuart Arnett, who is Arnett Consulting out of Concord. I think he was a city manager somewhere, and he had some very good ideas. At least they seemed to resonate with what I had learned from my earlier experience out in Ohio. So through a lot of meetings, we essentially, here's the situation, and I want my committee members to correct me or amend things if I misstate, but 94% of the land in Lyme is essentially untaxed. It's either in current use, it's federal land, it's town land, the town owns a fair amount of land, or it's under conservation easement. Taxes here have been increasing at 4.4% a year, and that means in roughly 16 years they're going to double. As a reference, my property here in Ohio, the tax in Ohio would be about a quarter of what I pay here. I just throw that out here. Areas in town, so part of our charge from Sue was, let's look at the tax base and what might be done to help things. I think somebody threw out we need $400,000 a year to really balance the budget and avoid these increasing taxes.
$400,000 a year would balance the budget?
Well, that's approximately what has been added each year.
Okay.
So if we had an increase in taxes at that rate, we could keep them flat.
Increase in tax revenues of 400,000?
No.
Please make that clear.
An increase, our
In
tax
costs.
is, our tax burden increases by approximately 400,000 a year.
Okay.
Do you have a general idea of what percentage of the total that is?
Well, it's 8.5 million, isn't it?
Well,
So
we're at
Neil's just said
9,
4%.
About 4%,
9 to 10
so it's about
million.
4.4.
That's what you said.
4.4.
I think that might understate it just a little bit.
That's the increase.
4.4 plus. Okay.
So the rule of 72, you divide that into 72 and you get to about 16. So the areas for development in town are limited, both according to the current zoning regulations, but also because of a lot of our roads aren't paved. Somebody, and I, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm a third-generation developer. I'm an attorney, but my grandfather and father did a certain amount of land development, so I kind of grew up around the business. Those days are way behind me, but I have some insight into what they look for and how it is done. There's a lack of sewer and water. I mean, everything here, we don't have a sanitary sewer system, and I don't think, because of our size, it's likely we'll get one. So everything's got to be perked, and you have to have soils. Dave could tell us all about that, I'm sure. And so that, we're mountainous, so you can't build on the mountains very readily. lack of services. Now, we all do deference to Sean, but to a developer, being closer to the extra services in Hanover would be a plus, both in terms of fire and the
What
bus
were you
line.
saying about I didn't follow about Sean.
Well, we have a policeman, or we have two
Yeah.
here, so I wasn't besmirching Sean, I'm just saying that
Oh, I see.
having access to the Mounties up the street
Yeah.
is a positive thing. Now, and also, there's a bus system that extends at least down to Kendall, I think, that could shoot down this way a certain distance, made some inquiry. Lyme has a reputation of being hostile to business. Now, I don't care one way or the other, I'm just coming here as kind of a new guy, we've been here 10 years, but that's my impression, and we met with several of the regional land developers, and that's what they told us. Let's throw it on the table. You know, if you wanted to encourage business development aside from the cottage industry, you gotta do something with your website, and you have to have an ombudsman or something that can help people get through the bureaucracy.
Just one quick question, so did they mention anything about land value as another issue?
It depends, it's all ROI, it's all, you know, if you're gonna do a commercial development, which is difficult in Lyme, and I didn't hear anybody, see anybody doing handsprings to come down here and do commercial development.
Right.
But, so it's residential, maybe some type of mixed use, but I think it's basically residential, it's just,
Yeah.
what's it cost, what's my yield, and what kind of return on investment,
Yeah.
you know, can I get?
But,
That is obviously a consideration.
you know, I would just say that there's places in Lyme now where that could be developed. Certainly, Pondview Apartments, I believe is for sale. Somebody could put a shopping center in there. And then all the land on the west side of Route 10, across the Mayfield Dutton Cottage Highway is all commercial, and it's just sitting there, you know, so as far as the planning board is concerned, we've had nobody come to ask to
Well,
do
we
any
met,
development.
I hear you, but
Yeah.
it's a little hard to explain, but when, we had the same problem in my little town, Canfield, they call it Cornfield, small town. And we had the reputation for 30 or 40 years of being absolutely hostile to business. And it was. And you didn't have to, you couldn't point to any specific thing, but somebody coming into town to try to do something which would have improved our tax base, got the message quickly. Okay, I'm not saying that's how it is here, I'm new, but I'm just saying that can't be.
I would just point out what, you know, to me is an irony of relating to that, and because the planning board just unanimously approved a site plan review that was certainly a business, and was sued. And then what we hear from the other side, that Lyme has a reputation of being, I don't know whether you're ascribing that as a general perception or in terms of the planning board or what, but it's an irony to me, given that we just approved this site plan review for a business, and on one side, we're getting sued from the perspective of people who feel that we were too generous, and hearing things like this, that there is an atmosphere that is hostile to business.
I wonder if it's not just, speaking of, or referring to the planning board, but just is the town
I'm
in
speaking more
general.
broadly.
Yeah, I don't think
Yes.
it's a planning board issue, I think it's more of a general, if you wanna move a business to Lyme or start a business in Lyme and develop some property, you're gonna have issues, whether it's planning board issues or issues with neighbors that don't want you there or whatever, or zoning issues, whatever it is, the perception is that it's extremely difficult, and so why don't we go someplace else where it's a little bit easier?
For instance, and I don't think he would object to me, we met with Lane's son-in-law, Rob Meyer, and he did the village. And he felt that there was much resistance, it was a very difficult project, and that's one of the most substantial developers in the Upper Valley. And I think it would be a cold day in hell with the current, with the perception, rightly or wrongly, to get somebody like that to come to Lyme and try to build something that would improve our tax base.
So what, if that's, let's just assume that's the case, what do you ascribe that perception to? I mean, one thing you're saying is, well, neighbors won't want it, or what is it that you feel is blocking businesses from coming to Lyme? That is, as you're saying, it's not the, if it's not the planning board, what is it?
Well,
Well, I think,
go ahead,
the Mill Gardens experience.
I was gonna point that.
Right, but the,
Right.
people
And
have the
Brian's
right, people have the right to
experience.
sue.
Right, exactly, and that's the kind of thing that gives the reputation.
Right,
Well, that's resistance.
Yes.
That's reluctance,
Yes.
and that makes it difficult.
yes.
And people are saying, why should I do that? Why should I come to Lyme if I'm gonna have to face all of that?
In both those cases, you know, the boards, you know, in the case of Mill Gardens, it was approved by the zoning board,
Right, so,
And-
right,
you know, it was,
right.
So it's really not our land use regulations or our boards, it's the
It's the reputation of the
townspeople.
town.
Well, it's not the reputation of the town, and some townspeople don't think that it's an appropriate idea in those situations. But, so my question is, we have a really, developed commercial area just north of town. In Earl Sprout's building, we have Tuckaway Timber there, and so what I wanna know, that's been on the market for quite a while, and what's wrong with using that for business?
It's not enough.
What do you mean it's not enough?
It's not enough, and it's not attractive enough. There has to be that 90s.
Okay, what do you mean by it's not enough? I don't understand, why is it not enough?
Earl, I know from church, I've been through, he's taken me through his building, I've
Uh-huh.
looked at it and so forth, and you could make a storage facility out of it, there's a number of things that you could do
Mhm.
with it. But my take is that really it's a residential development that is gonna give you your tax base here.
Okay,
This
so
is
now
ha-
can we just go back, what's wrong with Earl's building? I don't really understand what's
No.
wrong with it. Cause you said it's not enough, but not enough of what?
It's not enough of a footprint to create what's it being taxed at now? If you put tenants in it, it really doesn't change, does it, Sue?
Well, hold
So
it,
you-
I
you're
don't
talking
understand
about
about
this
what's
doesn't-
not enough of. I'm trying to get that understand, what don't we have to offer
That
the people?
That business area is not large enough
It's not large enough,
For
okay.
what though? What's a lot not large enough
For-
to
for?
generate
To
an
generate
additional
enough
tax base.
Tax revenue, so what would be large enough?
You could, I think, and I think our committee, that you're gonna have to develop some of the areas on Route 10. Okay, hopefully up toward Hanover. That seems to make the most logical sense.
Yeah, I'd also like to say that it's not just a property issue, but, I mean, if you're running a modern business and you have the internet service that we have here in town,
That
that's an issue.
we are totally agreed
That's-
on, and
that's-
we hear that
No
over.
cell phone service in lots of towns, I
Yeah.
mean, those are kind of the surrounding issues
Absolutely.
that make it much more difficult. So I think any type of going forward with this is, we need to have some sort of plan. If you're gonna try to develop it commercially, you have to have not only maybe update some of the zoning and really fine tune what exactly type of businesses you want in that zoning, but also, are we gonna be able to provide them internet and cell phone service and the things that any modern business is gonna look for.
Well, even as
Hold on,
residents.
let Mike speak.
I have, obviously, I had a business, so I'm very familiar with, and I had looked at Lyme. We have to be at the commercial businesses which, let's say, produce things. We don't have the power coming into town. There just isn't, very, very little that we have available. We don't have the phone service, we don't have sewer, we don't have water. So that and all these things are a reality which we're not gonna get in town because we don't live in New York State, we're in New Hampshire. And so this sort of defines the business area we have here, which is going to have to be what we've used the term over the years, the cottage industry or small businesses, but the critical point even for them is the internet.
Mhm.
And we are terribly hindered by that. And if I have promoted with everybody here on our committee, that what we need to do is to get a way of a private small company to put in the internet.
Mhm.
And that will then give Lyme the opportunity to move forward.
I would confirm that with exclamation marks. Everything that, over the years, the feedback we get, not only with more substantial businesses, but in terms of small businesses and individuals, increasingly, there is the demand for high-speed, dependable internet connection. And, that is something that has been sort of going around for years. Every time it comes up, somebody says, oh, there are some people working on that. And some people have been working on it, mysterious people for years, but it always seems to be, oh, well, some people are working on it. I remember, Sue, you said at one point that you had gotten a figure that it would cost $3.5 million, is that right? Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, I think it's.
In that
3.5
range,
million?
this private group, this committee that's working on it is working with ValleyNet now, and I think they're going to be able to bring it here perhaps in 2019?
2019? Well, that's next year.
Yeah,
Okay.
so.
The fiber goes right down 10, all the way over.
But that's
So-
not the only issue. The
I get
issue
that.
is
Right.
having a management structure, having somebody to actually do it, institute it, and build it, and manage it.
So you're saying they would run it, because a lot of times they'll just run it through town and not connect it, they would run it and connect it?
Yes,
The difference between wholesale and retail.
Okay,
And the one that goes through town right now is wholesale.
right.
I wanted to add one other thing, that what I was describing on the internet need was, you could infer that I was talking about businesses. You were also the impact of people living here. They now expect
Absolutely.
to have a, what is it, 4 or 5, I can't think of what the coding is, but I mean, enough so that you can, in the morning, you hit the button and everything comes up.
High-speed, dependable.
I can't get
I won't worry about
attachments where I live.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that all the time.
Going down every couple of hours.
So, I think that is a priority across the board for Lyme, and I don't know what the solution is.
We also had heard that same comment. We had somebody come and speak to us about challenges to millennials, just because we're seeing a
Exactly.
demographic loss in that age group here. And she said the first thing millennials do when they get out of the car is they turn on their cell phone and take a look at what they have, and it's like basically nothing.
And they get back in the car.
And they just go away, and so it's also shutting out a demographic
And-
segment.
And David, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you had said at some point that you've had the experience where essentially people call up and ask what the internet connection is, and that's the end of the conversation.
I talk to people about, they will call and ask about a property that's for sale, and they say, well, what do we have for internet? And very limited, and what about cell phone coverage, and very spotty, and they're not interested at all.
I have a question. What is it with the inability to put up a cell phone tower in this town?
There's not a problem. It is allowed in all districts.
No?
I think what the problem is you probably have 95% penetration of the cell phone market. Everyone has one.
Mhm.
And the cell phone comes to, why should we increase service? What's the purpose of putting a tower if we have that market penetration? You know, plain and simple, there's absolutely no increase in revenue for them by putting in better towers in this area. Everyone has a cell phone.
So that means we have to figure out a way to do it ourselves.
Yep.
Well, it seems like that's something that everyone can agree on, and that'd be a net positive for residential quality of life, as well as a net positive for supporting business. And so, I mean, in terms of action items, okay, we need to, like, one of the best things you guys could do would be to get together a group of people who would make this happen. The planning board really can't do that, but I think you could get a lot of support for whatever that is.
That's a good idea, but that's second in line,
Okay, to,
what we're talking about. I'd
well,
like
what,
to,
yeah,
I'd
we are
like to
talking
ramble
about,
on just a few
yeah,
more
we're
minutes.
economic development, so that sounds like.
No, you're
Yeah,
I'm violent agreement with you.
okay,
That it has to be done, but
Oh, so, go on.
if I may. So,
Right.
that's the situation that
Mhm.
our group perceives, and I think there must be some resonance with the planning board. People on fixed income are under the gun. I'm 67, I plan on work for another dozen years, God willing. But God forbid I go on fixed income, and 10 years from now, I'm paying $40,000 or $50,000 a year for my taxes. That's a lot of money. And so, one of the things that you see, there's 28, this was a month or two ago, there were 28 homes for sale on the market around here, which was a big, they tell me, a big increase, and I think that flows from the tax burden. So, there has to be a choice made in town. A choice has to be put to the residents. Do we want to be Williamsburg, okay, where we're preserving the facade of an 18th century sheep farming agricultural village at all costs? Or where we have to be wealthy, or we have to have two breadwinners earning big salaries to afford to live here and pay the tax burden? Or the other choice would be, can some reasonable amendments be made to our zoning code in a way that will allow some reasonable development that we can all, that the majority of us can live with, that will generate incremental tax base? Our committee has had lots of discussions about, if you allow this to happen, and you get more children, and it's $19,000 a year per child. Who's against kids? I'm not, I got 3 of them. But we need to think about that, and we may need some help with a consultant or somebody to think about those issues. For instance, Julia Griffin, who's the city manager in Hanover, we had a good meeting with her, and she said that when they built the Guile Road development, there were 116 units, there are 3 and I think 4 stories. Actually did a fairly good job. It's hidden down in there and you don't see it, but they only had 16 students come out of all of those units because married couples are getting married later, postponing having children, or oftentimes not having kids at all. Lebanon, some of the data we developed, they had a similar, they were allowing some projects to go forward. They projected so many kids were gonna come out, per unit, and it was much less than that. So that's one of the things we do have to think about. But I think that choice needs to go out to the broad community.
Let me jump in, and it's something that Eric read, and I guess you both raised, is, I'm getting the drift, and, so my question is, what, you said it's not enough, what is enough? What's the scale that you're talking about that would satisfy your perspective?
Chip Brown, the commercial realtor from Hanover, again, I know from Rotary, and met with Rob and I, and we just did some back of the envelope. You mentioned Pondview, and indeed, we met with the Purcells brothers, and that that could be available as a developed piece of ground. They got 60 acres. It's not all zone commercial, but
A substantial amount of it is, and
And
then
then you got
the
the hills.
Pondview
yeah.
part
The-
is
Here, I can-
grandfathered in.
Well, the Pondview part, this is the pond.
Right.
This is the current commercial district that's there. So, you know, the building is right about here at the edge. So this whole area back here behind the pond, you know, coming in across the dam, is all within the commercial district.
I remember
And-
when the Purcells came in, and then Mr. Barrett later, David and I went over what was possible there, and it was surprisingly substantial.
And, you know, this whole area to the north is, again, you know, yes, you do have the hills coming up behind here, but this front area, you know, is a huge area in here that's all,
He had a preliminary layout which he gave to us. It had some residential things. He had different options he was thinking about. But, for instance, if you allowed 12 to 30 units in their condo
Mhm.
development, senior living is a big issue in town. That's been very clear. That
I don't know whether you've seen, I know Sue's seen it, but we introduced a draft of a senior housing and
I did.
affordable housing article.
I did see
Yeah.
that. But that's something that, you know, we need to do, I think. But if you, and there's different things you could do. You can age restrict stuff. I have mixed
Yeah,
feelings about that, but go ahead.
I have very mixed feelings about that. First of all, Kendall is actually expanding, and so how much demand is there gonna be for senior living?
Well,
Yeah.
I'll answer that.
Yeah.
Because I went to the senior, well, it wasn't aging in place, group meetings for, well, it seemed like many years, I don't know, but we all got a lot older in the process. And became, and we all aged in place. And there was substantial and continues to be substantial interest within people in town now. So, I mean, that's.
Just
Well, that would be kind of a
Firsthand.
land development issue that they would take on, but I think the big thing for me is that, I would like to see a change in the master plan from the very beginning, because that kind of pushes your work forward.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's like, if we can make some changes with that, that would encourage not only commercial development districts, maybe an expansion of that little pink area there, but also some higher density living, in and around town.
The visioning process is a process, it's not something that we can change. We get feedback from the town, and if that's the town's opinion,
Exactly.
that's
Yeah,
how
and I
that's
get
how it
that, but,
functions.
you know, my feeling is that, at least the people I talk to, and my own personal opinion in the committee, is that because of the dramatic, and I think it has been a fairly dramatic increase in taxes. I was talking to Rusty Keith earlier today, he said since 2011, tax bills have gone up 40%. And about 4% of that is via higher value of property, but the other 36% is because of the constraints we have and the amount of properties we have that's taxable. So 40% since 2011 is pretty significant to me.
Well, doesn't that talk to about our spending? It doesn't talk to us about the deficit in our tax base, it has to do with our budget, okay? And what we as Lyme people have, the quality of life that we want at our school and in our community. I mean, tax base hasn't gone.
Yeah, I mean,
anywhere.
actually, if you go back to the early 2000s and you look at the percentage of where we're spending our taxes, the biggest growth is the school, which the town is very committed to.
Right.
I'm not
If
suggesting
I
we
could just
shouldn't.
add,
Yeah.
being a statistical nut, I went back, and over the last 10 years, we've averaged a 4% increase in our taxes.
Mhm.
So it's been very close to 4% all the way through.
Mhm.
And it's,
For 10 years.
for 10 years.
Yeah.
And I think that my sense is if you went back the 10 years before, that it would be closer to 3.1 to 3.5%. I think it's nicked up just a little bit. But, and that's also because of our requirements on school. We're getting less support on special ed from the state. If you go back and look at the state support, it's cut back, which then gets added onto our taxes.
If you go back to the early 2000s, you look at the percentage that the state was involved in, was much, much bigger than that.
Yeah, I think that, I understand the point, but it begs the point to me that going forward, we're having these tax increases. And if we don't do anything different, they're gonna continue, right? And so you talk about the schools, I think everyone supports the schools, but the thing that we can do different, I think, is to change our attitude and encourage, like I said, two things. A little bit more commercial development within the realms of what we want here in Lyme and what we're capable of, but also some higher density living to bring up the tax base. And that maybe could offset some of the increases that we're going to definitely see in the future.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to get back to, okay, so I see that, but when we talk about the list of things that our roads aren't paved, we don't have water and sewer, we're mountainous and a lack of services. So how do we address those issues by creating a larger commercial area? Because if we already have commercial or problems not getting it, we're not addressing the problems, why we're not having economic development coming in by increasing the area.
What you have to do.
Okay, but I'm just trying to say, we're not addressing those problems which were identified as impediments to commercial development here. So how can we deal with that? Or can we come up with a commercial development like pattern or concept that doesn't rely on paved roads, water and sewer, doesn't matter about the mountains, and it doesn't matter if we don't have a huge fire and police force? I mean, can we think of other types of commercial development that we could attract given what we have without having to put in those things that have been identified as impediments to others? So that's, I want to think about that before we say, let's just zone more, because we're not addressing the problems that we have as impediments today.
I've thought for many years about I used to write about economics. And in the back of my mind, I've had an essay called The Problem with the Invisible Hand.
What is the invisible hand?
Adam Smith was an economist in Britain who came up with, who wrote about how economies really work. He was a really remarkable guy in the 17th century, 1700s. And he came up with a notion about the invisible hand, meaning if you create the circumstances for people with rule of law and not undue regulation, to invest and use their own ingenuity, invisibly, good things happen. Okay?
Is that the sort of like the build it and they will come? Or?
That's exactly right. So, but the problem with the invisible hand is, I in my other committee, sat down, we had a first meeting.
This is in Ohio?
In Ohio,
Okay.
same thing.
Yep.
And then, I said, well, okay, let's talk about the sewers. And the woman sitting to my left, who was a dear friend from the Rotary Club back there, says, no, we need a community center. I said, okay, where are we gonna get the money? What do you mean? Comes from taxes, right? Okay, so you have to, the trouble with an invisible hand from a political point of view is, when a government builds a hole and digs a hole and fills it in, they can employ people and say, we did that hole. But when you're in a group like this, you're trying to create the circumstances which are invisible, so that people like Kevin Purcell or Myers or who are entrepreneurs will be attracted to the area and do their thing. You can define what the limits of what they might do are, but you can't plan. That's why the Soviet Union didn't work. Okay, you have to just.
Let's get back to Vicky's question, which we have a substantial inventory of land and open buildings and various building sites that could be used for commercial, and Vicky's my understanding what Vicky's saying is, okay, so we've identified some of the hindrances, and they're difficult to get around, and what can we do with what we have, rather than.
Why don't you want to do anything additional?
Why can't we work
Well,
with the
first of all-
Purcells to help them if they wanna
Yeah,
sell their?
Hold on,
Sorry,
hold on,
sorry,
who
sorry.
said that we don't wanna do anything additional? This is just a question.
Okay, but I mean, I would hope that we would look at the broad situation and not look at our business district here and say, okay, we'll tweak that, that'll get the
That's
job
not-
done, but that
that-
won't get the job done.
But the best data we have are these properties that are Purcell's not selling, Earl Strauss, it's vacant. If we can't solve the problem with those, what do we stand to gain by changing zoning?
For instance, the
Open it up.
Purcell property,
Shouldn't we work on getting those?
she said $400,000 is a shortfall. Purcell property, if you build units that cost 500,000 for something that's so expensive here, there's $400,000. If you build 30
So
units
why
up
hasn't
there-
somebody done it?
Because developers are put off by the no garden situation.
But
Well,
there's,
no,
but,
there's a septic, that's part of the giant problem there, is the septic issue. You can't really build that infrastructure there.
Well, you can build it on the moon if you have enough money.
Well, if you have enough money,
But-
and then, yeah, it's, anyways.
but, I guess what I'm getting at is, you're saying the perception is keeping people from doing it, but the zoning isn't? Because that's
When you go into your
developable.
zoning ordinance, and I went through it, and unfortunately I color coded it and I left it on my table. When you go through here, all of the, a lawyer would call it precatory language, the words are, we want to preserve our agricultural heritage. We want to do this, we gotta preserve the soils. I came here, and I loved Amy Record's elk farm and the Bailey's turkey farm. It's wonderful, I don't want anything to change. But we're running into a wall, is my
But
point.
in terms of this land we're talking about, if a developer wanted to develop that today, they could do it, I'm assuming.
I met with a couple developers,
Yeah,
2 or 3,
Yeah.
and they said, we don't wanna go to Lyme, we saw
well,
what
but
happened
that's a
with.
different issue.
I
No,
mean,
that
it
is the
is not a
issue.
different.
Then,
That is the issue.
and what is that issue?
Okay, why don't they
Just
want?
what
Why
he
don't they
said,
want-
I don't wanna come here because
But-
I see what other people have run into, and I don't wanna go
But
through
you're
that
here-
again.
you're-
It's not zoning
How
and
do we-
planning.
Hold on,
How do we fix it?
hold on, you wanted to say?
Well, I just wanted, well, first of all, I really value this conversation, and I think it's really overdue, and it's really great that
I
we're
agree.
talking about this, even though there's disagreement, it's awesome. My husband's a business owner, we moved to town, I'm starting a business, so I totally get, like, I'm in it right now, and I would say, and I've talked to Kevin a lot about, why he wants to sell Pondview, and it isn't really, I mean, for Kevin, Pondview is far from all of his other
Exactly right.
properties, so for him to send guys out, it doesn't even make sense. So he'd like to just get rid of it, not because the property isn't valuable or it doesn't offer anything great, it's because for his business model, it doesn't suit his purposes at the time. So
Well-
the other thing though that I would like to definitely say, I've heard many times, is not that we're a hostile place for business, but that we don't have the necessary infrastructure. And so, if you want to put it on a business to develop that infrastructure, then you're not gonna have the businesses come that don't have the capacity for it. So, I don't know a lot of businesses, like, so for example, in Lebanon on, Great Hollow Road, when they wanted to expand that area, the city worked to get improved sewer down there. Like, so the city actually provided some of the necessary infrastructure for that area to be developed. So you can't just expect that zoning is going to change the desire.
The point I was trying to make with your zoning code is, okay, so, let's say somebody doesn't want anything built in Lyme, and let's say they've got a big checkbook, okay? And let's say they're gonna go to court every time somebody is gonna do something. The agricultural language, the fuzzy language in here, the definitions in the definitional section, all support a vision of this town that some judge is gonna read when he's litigating the point. And they're gonna go, oh, see how this is defined on page 8.6? This is really hurting you. Okay, the way this thing is set up, I'm saying that as an attorney.
Well,
There needs to be a different process.
Well, it comes from the master plan, okay? And so I think you were right
He
about,
is right.
like, okay, so if we need to have something that says, you develop it, gotta change the master plan. But what I don't get is first of all, the invisible hand is not working here for us commercially, so I don't understand why.
You haven't let it.
Oh, stop. What I don't understand is why we don't act as ombudsman to buy the Purcell property and let's develop it in a way that would be good for Lyme. If we, the community development group, and, I don't know what other committees in town were behind that, I think that would go a long way. Same with buying Earls. Why don't we control the development so that we're getting what we want, and there isn't the invisible hand coming in? I don't know how we attract the money that we need, but let's do that. And those are in places that are already zoned for development, and Earl's is close to town, people can walk into the country store, to get their lunch, or ride their bikes. I mean,
So-
I like that idea of us trying to do it in that way.
And so there are tools like form-based code that we can implement in zoning that will give the planning board or the town more control over the type of development that occurs.
I don't even, I
And
just saying,
ways-
let's just get a consortium of people to develop those properties.
Who's gonna run it, and how much are you gonna put up?
I have zero money to put up, I pay my taxes, so I'm doing pretty good.
But I mean, that's.
But I'm
that's
saying
the
there are
question.
people in this town who are creative developers, who can work to get, it's a project. There are lots of communities that do economic development in their own town. And that's happened in Newport, it happens in Claremont, it happens for any town that has a business park that the town has run. Lebanon had their airport business park, it happens.
Those
And-
fascinating stuff too.
Okay,
They're just big
I'm
towns.
just gonna interrupt
Okay,
now.
but I'm challenging, why can't we do that to get development here, and then, we don't need to own it forever, but
Okay.
just to get it done.
We can come back to our little group here, but I wanna give the public a chance to chime in, and you had.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Rich Brown, I live on Orford Road. I wanted to respond to some of the questions that you and Vicki asked. To think about what can the planning board do? You're not in charge of bringing internet in. You're not in charge of getting businesses to come to town. You're not the Chamber of Commerce. You're not the business cheerleaders. But what can you do? And so here's some challenges that I want to throw out to the planning board. We're talking about bringing internet to town. What in the town's regulations would cause any business to shy away from coming here? I know there's a telecommunications ordinance. I know it's long, it's involved. Is there any chance that the telecommunications ordinance is causing technology providers from just saying, oh, forget it, I'm not coming?
Would you wanna speak to that?
I don't know the answer, and I don't need an answer
Well,
right
Dave-
now.
David-
Actually, I can speak that the ordinance, it limits,
It
some
limits
sell
a lot of
for-
things.
Well, it limits a lot of things, but it
And so,
doesn't.
actually,
Let
so,
David.
no, I actually don't want a response to my specific
Well,
questions
no,
because
but
it'll take too
I would
long.
like there to be a response.
Okay,
So- and I'd
let me
like
ask my
no,
questions
please,
first.
Let David respond.
I would really like to ask my questions first. I got
I would like
two more
David to
questions.
respond to that question.
All right,
There are limitations, but it is not a ordinance that it prohibits. It encourages things like co-location. So if you have an existing tower, you're not gonna put one up right next door. But the telecommunications, you know, for internet, if you wanted to put up towers for a large area Wi-Fi, that's allowable. If you wanted to put up cell towers, that's allowable, you know, this is all districts.
Is it allowable by right?
No, it does allow, it usually go through site plan review.
Okay, okay.
But a lot of that is, you know, things to prevent, you know, when you look at a tower, you wanna make sure that the fall zone of that tower is not going to be anywhere near somebody's house.
Yes, but aren't those ordinary engineering concerns that would be addressed by?
And they could be, you know, they would be addressed.
Okay,
It's
so,
not-
so good. So I'm bringing up the telecommunications ordinance as a possible inhibitor of growth of telecommunications. I got two more things. I see the ordinance, no, I'm gonna ask you, what can the planning board do to review the ordinance with an eye toward making the hostile to business hostile to business reputation go away? I think of Mill Gardens, I think of Stella's, I think of Dowd's and the Latham Tavern. I was here at the first time when Tammy Dowd came in, she said, so we're thinking about expanding, and the list of hurdles that she had to jump through to get, to begin to get an application together that would be, would get through, was considerable. I'll also point out, there's a business up, just north of here at the Loch Lyme Lodge that has run into significant, opposition from the ordinance. The ordinance
The
makes
lot
it,
line, what could you?
the Pinnacle project.
The Pinnacle
Yeah,
project,
right.
yeah, with the development.
has,
Yeah.
has run into significant difficulties. All those businesses ran into significant difficulties either because the ordinance was there or because the ordinance was so strict and so favorable to other people in town that
Favorable.
they felt they had the right to sue. And so what can the ordinance do to encourage businesses? I think that's where the hostile to business comes in, that it would be hard to imagine downtown Lyme without Stella's. It would be hard to imagine downtown Lyme without the Latham Tavern. And yet, there were tremendous hurdles to get them approved. So, that's point two. Point three is housing.
I would disagree about the tremendous hurdles.
I think, I really would like to say the third thing, and then we can hash the whole thing out. The third thing is housing.
Yeah.
Again, Pinnacle Project has tried to find ways to have more dense housing, smaller housing. They're attractive to millennials. It's extremely difficult to do anything but single-family development.
I would also say that I don't wanna
So-
always have us go back to the Pinnacle project, but the Pinnacle project also went before the town twice and had a direct vote.
And but my question to you, the board, is, are you doing enough to allow small units to be developed? Are you doing
Well,
enough
I-
to allow multiple
I think that's a
dwellings,
fair-
dense
I
development?
think that's a fair question that we can.
And that's all I'm asking. I don't wanna be scolding.
Yeah.
I wanna say there are,
It felt a little
okay,
scary.
but
But
these,
I know you for a long time.
these are problems
I
in
can
town.
handle it.
And what can the board do to solve them?
I think that's a fair question, and we can certainly look at that.
Joe,
I disagree with a lot of your characterization. I would just say that since my recollection and the work on one of the things that the master plan, which was quite an ordeal, and every master plan is an ordeal, and for those of you who haven't been through it on this end, it's really something. You got a lot of different points of view fighting for supremacy.
Yeah.
One of the most pressing points of the last master plan was vibrant downtown center. And before that period, there was nothing. And now we have 3 great restaurants and a very vibrant downtown. I would also say that, to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been, and people who have been on the board for a while, a rejection of a business site plan that I can recall. And,
10 years.
yeah, and that if anything, we get criticized, we've been criticized for being too generous. So, from my point of view, we get it from both sides, not just from what you're saying. And I think that's an important thing to remember, that when you're on the planning board, you're dealing with it from both sides. And that as members, we have to respect both sides. And it's a struggle.
Go,
I
I mean,
just
I'm
wanted
done.
to
I
add-
don't, don't,
I just
He's
wanted to add-
done,
him.
you don't have to talk to him anymore,
Yeah.
but say what.
I just wanted to add a small piece of perspective. So I just sat through site plan review for a development I was doing in downtown West Lebanon.
Mhm.
And this is nothing like that. It was, everything I was doing fit into their master plan to a T. I had to do thousands of dollars of survey updates because they didn't like a specific tree that I had on the plan. So I think if you have a larger perspective, if you talk to people from surrounding towns about the experience they've had trying to develop businesses or perhaps buy property, whether it's residential or not, I mean, I think, you know, there are hurdles in every town, but the zoning, it serves as some sort of level of protection, so we don't have just anything. So I think it's gotta be, I mean, I think we're smart to take a critical eye and not just say, okay, well, I think you're right, we need more commercial development, let's just draw this box. I mean, because it's not necessarily, although in a perspective it may solve a problem, but will it? And so like, that's our job, is to really take a critical eye and say, well, we need to find the right solution, not just the quick solution. And I think, I just think that's a perspective. I really am proud to sit on this board, and I think John does a great job. I think we all really are critical about what's going on, but we have not had the opportunity to see development in this town, so I don't know how, I mean, there, so.
Could we address both the master plan
Sure.
and our visioning, we'd like to work on, cause our plan is 5 years old.
Our master plan is 5 years old.
Well,
It's-
the most
it's-
recent update was
But,
5 years ago.
yeah, it was 5
it's
years
really-
old, but our visioning is older than that.
Older than that, right.
Yeah.
Let's give it back to Mel.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
as I said, we went through this, the Urban Planning Institute came in and they conducted what's called a charrette, which is you get everybody in a room like this, and you have big sheets of paper, and you write on the wall.
Yeah, we did that in the last master plan.
Yeah, and it was very good. I mean, there were some dumb ideas, and there were some good ideas, but everybody had a say. Nobody felt that there was some force pushing everybody out of the way, so, and we need to do that here. Now, I would hope that the planning board, maybe our committee, maybe the Lyme Foundation, we could figure out a way to do that, to give everybody time over a series of nights. You know, we all can't come on a given night, but have 2, maybe 3 of these things, and to try to,
This is how it was done last time.
that's what I understand talking with Sue.
Yeah.
But it's time, we need.
I think it certainly could be an appropriate time, and I think that if we're gonna do a visioning, we should, it'd be good to have your input, and we should get other groups' input, and make sure that you're an advocate. I mean, I guess it seems to me like you are advocating a certain point of view, and I would wanna definitely have other groups and advocacy groups.
Let me respond to that real briefly. That's not really true. I'm a lawyer. Lawyers just wait till the evidence comes in. And I went through this before, and I had some ideas, but there were a lot of other good ideas that were developed in the process. And you don't know what you don't know, right? So that's why you go through it. I'm just saying that if you want to get a tax base, that was our committee's charge. You know, in a meeting with the developers, it looks like it's gonna be some residential development of some kind.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not in
Regardless, I
favor of
think-
it, I'm not
think-
against it, but that's what,
I think
Inclusion
we
was.
would wanna, in terms of inclusion, we wanna have a number, inputs from a number of groups. And hopefully, we really can, I mean, while I know, well, gosh, maybe I don't know. You know, maybe we can agree on a lot, and maybe we can get a visioning program where we have a lot of people with different points of view who are pretty committed and agreed on the visioning process, which would be ideal.
to Vicky's point earlier, I think it was using the internet, maybe somebody with, that can kind of be a sub-theme. What can we do to
We're
try
just
to
losing
improve
time
things?
by not dealing with that. I mean, we've got the stupid fiber optic running right through town, it's
Mhm.
ridiculous.
It is,
And, you know, there's,
fair point.
well, we don't even, like, we just need to do it ourselves and, you know, in some way. And I don't understand, we've got a lot of very bright, brilliant children that were educated here, have gone off, and they're out there in the world, and they need to come back home and do that as a business proposition and make it work for our community. I mean, we need to reach out to
Well,
people
and
in the
it
field
is
to come
also
back and
very,
do it.
very common, I mean, just to that point that old enough now to say, young people go away and after 10 years wanna come back.
Right.
And it would be great to have an environment that would welcome them. And especially where they're coming back to bring their business ambition to their hometown, that would, you know, benefit the town and them. But we need to provide that environment for them, and without that type of service, they're just not gonna come back.
One of the things, excuse me,
From the very beginning, when we started doing our committee, one of the things we felt like we needed to, and I know that we did this because I wrote it, was we needed to have a process to which we understood how it was that we get millennials, kids, grandkids that grew up here to come back and want to be here and bring their skill sets, whatever those skill sets are, back to the area. And so that was always kind of a part of our committee's visioning process. And so we quickly identified that from multiple layers, yes, it's internet, yes, it's cell service, but it's also type of housing. I mean, 28, 30-year-olds not gonna be able to afford to walk into a $600,000 house, it's not gonna happen.
And one of the great challenges, it's not like we haven't thought about
Yeah,
this.
no, that's
And wanted to address this well, and, one of the great challenges is balancing all the different elements. I think as a board, we don't have the luxury that people not on the board have. We need to balance volume, we need to balance impact of development, and there are a lot of moving pieces. And also respect what is at least is a substantial part of the community that has, you know, pretty strong feelings about the environment where they wanna live, why they wanna live in Lyme. So there are a lot of different pieces that make it quite a challenge to get just the right mix. You know, what, yeah.
To the visioning, are we gonna be able to?
one of the other things we haven't discussed yet,
What about the vision?
we would like to, our committee wants to retain a consultant, like we worked with Ball State before. Originally, we thought we could work with, UNH has a program.
Yeah, sure.
There's Plan New Hampshire has a program. And they're okay, they're not expensive, but you've gotta fill out papers and report in and do an update and all of this stuff. We would prefer to work with a private consultant. Perhaps this Arnett fella, you had another person open, anybody else has a good idea. that would be fine, and we'll go out.
So you wanna do the visioning?
No, our combined group
Oh, I see.
and the Lyme Foundation. So we put maybe a steering committee from your group, somebody from our
A
group.
mix of people.
A mix of
Yeah.
people, maybe from the church or those guys,
Yeah.
however you wanna do it.
Yeah.
And so to have our charrette figure out what we're gonna do at Dow's, or it's probably not big enough here, wherever we're gonna do it. But have somebody who does this professionally lead us through the
Last
exercise,
time we had-
identify issues to be
Last
discussed.
time we had we had the Upper Valley,
Regional Planning
Regional
Commission.
Planning Commission, they did a great job.
And can I just ask, I've worked with both Plan New Hampshire and New Hampshire Listens, what's wrong with them?
So Plan New Hampshire, I can't remember the lady's name.
Robin.
There was a deadline and there was a
Well,
bunch
yeah,
of,
you have to
a
apply to get
bunch of
in.
papers and then and it was like $2,500. And if you did that, then you had to, I'm not a
I've
bureaucrat, I'm the
worked-
opposite
I've worked with
of a
them,
bureaucrat.
okay, so-
And it was very off-putting to me as somebody who wanted to get something done.
Because you get a whole design team
Mhm.
to come in, and you get a transportation person, you get a sewer person. They put together a really
Well, they
effective
gave you
group
s-
that's good for your community,
Yeah.
for whatever your project is. So I gotta say, I think the value there is extraordinary for, yes, you have to maybe put up Robin for the evening and you have to pay for food and do the event, but they do a great write-up. And I think it also has a lot of credibility in the state because they're a nonprofit, they're here to stay, and they stand by their work. And New Hampshire Listens ran a really great statewide program about the state's future that partnered with the regional planning commissions, and they did a great event down in Claremont that I went to, and I liked their follow-up also. So in terms of reporting out back to us, we had a product.
We're out of this cycle for that. I mean, we could go revisit it, but it was, one of them was, you kinda had to do it by this time, and then you could come back next year. And so we,
Yeah, I
just
mean,
the timing didn't work.
Remembering the last one, which I wasn't on the board then, but I went to all the, many of the meetings for the last master plan, which basically they were held at different people's places and out at the Lyme Academy, or people's homes and barns and stuff. It was a long process. The whole thing between the questionnaire and then all the meetings, it was maybe a 2 or 3 year process. And that's what it takes, because I guarantee you that whatever you come up with, or we come up with, is going to be, let's just say, questioned forcefully from every side. And you need, I'm understating it, but you really need to have a substantial foundation that is, you can go back to and explain why you're coming to the conclusions you come. You can't rush it. You can't. You do so at your own peril.
And so I work at the Regional Planning Commission, and we work with a lot of towns, and every town does it differently, but it is not a quick process. And some towns just approach it on a chapter by chapter basis, like.
Well, that's actually, getting to that point, at the end of the master plan, I think you were there, Aaron, some people stuck it out to the end, and they really pressed us.
And Stella's wasn't even here then, so we couldn't even go have a beer afterwards.
But they really pressed us, but I have to say, they pressed us fairly, and we changed things and everything, but what we came away from was that the process of doing the master plan and one big thing is really an ordeal. And what we concluded that night was, what we're gonna do going forward is have a rolling update of the master plan, which is what we undertook. The conversation has shifted because there's been so much focus on commercial, but what we were focusing on was writing a housing chapter and getting that into the master plan for the first time, and probably doing some visioning associated with it, so that we can avoid the monstrous encyclopedic and traumatic to the town experience of reinventing the whole thing over again. So what we had hoped to do was get to the housing chapter, and I still think that's certainly something for us to consider, to do, you know, we could get the housing chapter divisioning on that, and then go to commercial or business after that. But that's an open discussion.
Just a quick question, because I'm on the planning commission in Thetford.
Yeah.
People would love to do a rolling master plan, but it's not allowed. Is it allowed in New
Yes.
Hampshire?
It is allowed in New
Yes.
Hampshire, yes.
Another great thing about New Hampshire, you can have
I think there
you can
are
have a roll,
reasons
you
not
can,
to have a rolling
in
plan,
fact,
but
I've
this is
seen
interesting,
people
yeah.
take our master plan and roll it down the hill with great enthusiasm, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, part of the stuff that came from that earlier one was developing the downtown, trying to get restaurants in town.
Exactly.
Well, the whole town came together,
That's right,
and they said they wanna do that, we've done that.
exactly,
So I think what's starting to come now is you talk about the next waves.
yeah,
What's the next thing that's gonna continue to move the town forward, whatever direction the townspeople choose.
exactly.
And I think to a couple points about, Earl's Building and Purcell's, like, Earl's Building has some pretty unique challenges in that it was originally kind of warehousing. So you have warehousing space, so when you talk about like trying to change that to frame loading, to change anything, actually put multiple offices in, you're gonna talk about septic changes, all these other things, so that building, you're talking, I think Nick, when Tarm was there, you had what, 15, 20 employees in that region?
I'm not sure.
In that,
Yeah,
so when
30,
you,
yeah.
when you start looking at that versus what that building could be, it's gonna require significant updates that may or may not fit into what we can do for zoning. So I agree with Vicky, it'd be really cool to see, but I think it's almost a dream at this point,
So,
because the cost per
so
square
what
foot
do
to buy
What do
it.
you think of, I mean, when we look, it's I guess a difficult asset, but it's a real asset. I mean,
It is.
it's centrally located, whether that's a viable building going forth or not, but it just seems like something
It
could be
is,
done.
and so you look at manufacturing, right, so that building originally had people in there working,
Right.
building things, selling them as
Right.
novelties or other things that they originally were, which was great. The problem is, you start to look at manufacturing to bring it into it, you're talking about a frame construction.
Right.
The insurance rates alone are gonna be tremendously painful for someone to get in there, any kind of manufacturing, electricity costs, everything else that go into this. It's a building that has tremendous potential, but there's so many obstacles in the way of trying to convert that into something else that it's very difficult. And it's gonna take the perfect scenario to come into it with an employee capacity as well as a storage capacity that can utilize that building to its fullest. And you're talking about the unicorn at this point. So then you start looking at what do you have to do to create change in that structure. And I think it's gonna be very difficult from someone coming in to purchase it, the cost per square foot that they're gonna spend to buy it, and then to fix it, the ROI on that's gonna be 60 years.
So
It's a tough scenario, so that's that one.
Can I just ask you a
Yeah.
question? So here, I mean, this may sound like terrible, so what if the town demolished it so that the new developer had a clean
You
set?
gotta buy it from Earl for Earl's price first.
Okay, I'm just saying, okay, so it's unicorn, but if, rather than using something that
Yeah.
might not be appropriate, I mean, what can we do to facilitate? Maybe that's what we need to do
I
to
think it's-
facilitate, is take down that building, buy it, take it down and offer it for sale to
Who-
somebody who will.
Where's
put
the tax
in-
that's gonna pay for
Yeah.
it? I mean, I think,
Okay,
I agree with
okay,
you.
I'm just
Yeah.
talking about, like, what do we need to have economic growth?
No, and I agree, I think that your ideas, I'm not speaking against them, I think they're
Right.
great, but I think at the end of the day, you have to have the financial capacity to take care of those things to make that leap. And we can't even get internet in this town.
Can I throw out
So,
a different,
Okay,
and then the
okay, well,
Purcell's,
something
like,
entirely
let's-
new? Chris, you wanna introduce your idea?
I'm not sure which one.
The one about what's good about Lyme and what brings people here, what do we have and how do we monetize it?
It was more of a just thought process
Well,
on
perfect, that's what we're doing.
how do you generate revenue without generating new costs in the school? I tend to agree with Niels that if we create an environment, and I would say, we've talked about all the bad things in town, not bad, but difficult, obstacles, legal, perhaps zoning, I don't want anybody to get defensive, I'm new,
So
perhaps planning.
it's our job to be defensive. We're defensive when we walk into the room, so don't worry about it, we're used to it.
But we have to create that environment, so whether it's an ombudsman, whether it's a website, whether it's this committee, it's hiring outside experts, or doing both, trying to get this thing moving. I think it's important enough to try a bunch of different things now. You know, I talked about why Lyme is so special, and it's in outdoor nature and the skiway and Post Pond and the river. Dartmouth used to have a conference center that they got rid of. You know, I know several of the venues in Hanover are swamped, they're packed with alumni, and so there are ways to draw in tourists or other dollars. Again, it becomes difficult, how do you monetize that for a tax base? But I just think we need to be more creative, because they are daunting, sewage, water, power.
I think that being more creative is a great idea.
So I would just ask that we, you know, let a bunch of different ideas run. I'm not saying that we have to support any of them, but we just see if they bring fruit.
Absolutely.
Because I think, to everyone's point, there's so many creative and bright people in the town, we have so much going for us, we have to work through some of these issues, and they've been issues for decades.
Yep. Agreed.
The very last piece I was gonna say is, you talk about like different ideas, I personally would love to see a RVC in where Earl's building is. So-
River Valley Club, it's an
Oh.
athletic center.
Because you talk about frame loading and things that could actually possibly support, granted the septic has to be upgraded, but you look at things like this.
Indoor soccer.
This
my
is an
friend.
activity-driven place,
Indoor
this is
soccer.
an activity-driven community, so you provide them opportunity to do that outside of
Well,
winter.
That would be fantastic.
These are the things that,
So how do we entice an RVC?
you have to create, you're gonna have some septic problems right off the bat. You're gonna have all kinds of issues, but it just comes down to like, what does the community want? And I think this is the right time for the master plan review, to sit here and say, what do we want? This town loves outdoor activities, give them the opportunity. So it just comes down to, open the door again, let the floodgates talk, let people talk and come up with the ideas.
Totally agree with you, but the RVC is a non-starter in my opinion. I do some work at UVAC, and the
I don't
competition.
know all these initials, what is UVAC?
Upper Valley Aquatic Center.
Okay.
Okay, there's a tremendous competition right now for the health club side of things, and they're all fighting over the same few customers. I don't think we have the base here in mind to run the numbers for even a small river club, but that's my opinion. But if you can find someone to do it, that's
If we can
cool.
get a commitment from all 1,800 people to join the club, you know, maybe we can get
There
it
you
to
go.
work.
There's a little guy in Fairleigh that's doing really well right now, so no one thought he could work in
Is there
that
one,
square
there's one
footage.
in Fairleigh?
Right where the movie store used to be.
Really?
I went
How- how
there yesterday
big
and
is
it was
that?
packed.
He's,
Just opened in Heartland as well.
the micro ones are killing it, so it's just a matter of if you build it,
Size?
Yeah.
they will come.
Okay, so I mean, again, this is an example where, well, everybody doesn't agree, but let's leave the door open for, considering how we can,
Where do we go from here?
One thing I keep hearing is, that the town is unfriendly, the zoning is unfriendly, and from my experience, I've been zoning administrator since 2009, and I hear, people complain, oh, you can't do anything in Lyme, but yet I don't have people coming to me and asking.
There's a reason.
And well, that's, we gotta find that reason, because, I find that there's, usually when somebody wants to do something, there are exceptions, but, for the most part, ways can be found. And, or what they wanna do is completely allowed. And it's just a perception, and I think
Yeah,
that perception really needs to be worked on.
I'd really like, because I hear this phrase so much, and people who never come to planning board meetings will tell me about their perception. But I can tell you that ever since I've been on, and I started on here during the Lincoln administration, and compared to when I first came to town, and I got run through the gauntlet when I first came to town. It was brutal. This has been a fairly positive. I know you won't agree with that, but even with you, I hope we've been reasonably fair. But by and large, I can't remember too many instances where there was a nay vote, and in fact, we even got cookies from, and it was really because of Vicky, because Vicky kept a Lyme business in town because of her knowledge of what was available. We got cookies from them. So, you know, what I often hear about the perception, granted I'm very biased, but is a lot different from what I see going on here. I think that if people came to more meetings, at least they'd have a fairer perception, and I'd really like to thank people for coming, and also like to make sure anybody who wants to speak from the public is heard from. There's somebody with a raised hand there. So please identify yourself, sir.
David Roby from Bliss Lane, 45-year resident. The master plan talks about commercial development and tax base, and it makes the very important point that the best way of controlling taxes is by controlling spending. And we've just gone through, we've just completed the budgeting process. And the school, hearing loud and clear that taxes are too high, came in with an increase of less than inflation, 1.86%, 1.78%. And the town budget is also under control. So talking of needing to raise an additional $400,000 a year, this year, next year, the year after that, I think is mistaken. I think that the way we avoid that problem is to stop spending money. Don't spend it, and we don't have to raise it in taxes. And another, I think, really important point is that if we were to encourage development that would produce much higher taxes, we would have to increase the development enormously. What's the commercial tax base right now?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, but to raise $400,000 a year at current tax rates is.
Well, to your point, when we did the master plan, David did the now famous and much repeated, quick and very simple calculation of what it would take to move the needle. Every time we go over it, I forget what the point of his calculation was that in order to move the needle on taxes, there would need to be a vast multiplication of what was presently at that time commercially available.
Well, I think what David
Maybe
did,
you
I think
remember.
you took the six
I took the
largest
six largest-
commercial in town,
Yeah.
and then added 20 more of
I looked
the
at
average
the
of that size.
average size, average taxes of the six largest, the Lyme Inn, Dowd's, Wayne Pike's, Mascoma Building, Earl Stroud's Building, and then looked at, what the income from that was, and I just added 20 to the tax base, and then calculated out that if you divided that amount up over all the properties in Lyme, each lot, you would end up reducing taxes by about $100 a year.
Which you wouldn't, because that scale of development would entail a huge demand on town services. So that's something to consider.
So it may be that the committee could reconstitute themselves as tax vigilantes. Forget about the tax rate.
I think we need to hear from this committee, and it's a valuable committee that should stay just as it is. And we'll consider other opinions as well.
I think David's point is valid. I mean, there are two sides to this equation.
You can talk about spending, not spending. When you're talking about school budget, town budget, that's great. But you haven't considered the warrant articles and the special needs that the town has with roads. You know, you can't stop storms from coming in and wiping out roads. That's gonna take extra money. You don't do that within a fixed budget.
But it doesn't happen every year.
It does on the river. It hasn't in the past, but there are, you know, everything is increasing, the cost of equipment is increasing, the people keep asking for raises, you know, there are a lot of things.
People want raises?
Yeah, money goes,
That's
well, your
outrageous.
select board is tired of being the lowest paid in the state.
$1,000 goes a long way.
But costs are gonna go up regardless, and the things are gonna be expensive, and it's gonna continue to rise, and there's just no way around that. You can't control taxes by controlling spending. I mean, we keep a pretty tight budget, and the school and the town has done that, but we have special needs coming up that are gonna drive that right back up again. And it's gonna be about $400,000 again this year.
All right, so I want to make sure that anybody in the public who has something to say gets the opportunity.
I'm curious on how many of you are dead set against any further development in town?
You have to make it, if you don't even get one, you're gonna have to reframe the question.
Right.
I mean, the way it's worded. I mean, so.
How many are in favor of some reasonable development, probably on Route 10,
Main corridors.
on the main corridor?
Some reasonable development?
Yeah.
Define, yeah, I mean, I like reasonable.
That's a lawyer working.
I think that is a lawyer working the room. It avoids the tough questions.
Do you have a
But we're gonna have
sense-
to get to those, yes.
Do you have a sense of the blend?
Well, hold on, let me just get, Sue Ryan?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think one thing the board could do is take a close look at the ordinance and try to remove some subjective language, like in accordance with the master plan. I think that's a very poor phrase. The ordinance is supposed to embody the master plan.
Well,
It should,
I like the thing about subjective language, but I think that's just repeating what is basically embodied in the law. The master plan is behind everything.
but you shouldn't have to repeat it in the ordinance. It's confusing, in my opinion, to the person who comes in, particularly an appellant, who
It's
thinks.
particularly what?
To someone who may appeal.
Okay,
So the zoning ordinance should just say, just shouldn't use that language. Every section, 826 whatever, should say exactly what you're gonna do or can't do.
okay.
And
It reduces costs.
Okay,
It's very expensive.
thank you.
And the objectives in the zoning code should be rethought, so that right now it's supportive of sheep farming, okay, and agriculture. It really is, go through it.
It is supportive of what the visioning
Yeah,
was.
pastoral, low density, what,
Fine, but if having that in the ordinance is an impediment when you go to court.
So who moved here for that kind of stuff?
for what kind of stuff?
The pastoral sheep farming community?
I think it's a beautiful view.
My family.
Well, yeah,
So let's have a show of hands of the people who moved here for the sheep,
I didn't move here, but 7 generations back then.
or for the pastoral,
Yeah, I mean,
The rural lifestyle.
yeah, the rural lifestyle.
We're not rural, but I can't afford it anymore.
Right, yeah, well, that's definitely.
And I think that's the rut, right?
Yeah.
It's what's in the master plan is
That's-
wonderful, right?
that's
Except that now we're paying, we're having a hard time paying for that.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of the blend between commercial development and increased residence development that you think would be?
From talking with the developers, there didn't seem a lot of interest in doing commercial development here. It was more, let's do some more intense residential development. That there's a 5,000 unit need in the Upper Valley for housing right now. And so they gotta make money. I mean, they can't.
is that gonna necessarily give us the tax base increase that we want? I mean, that's the thing, why can't we figure out how to carve out a commercial niche for ourselves? I mean, clearly there's a housing shortage because the college is growing, the medical center's growing, you know, Lebanon, which has water, sewer, and amazing access, you know, is providing a lot of places for businesses to locate, but those aren't the businesses that would be appropriate for Lyme. So why can't we think about what would be the best for here?
You
that-
can.
And try to get those people, and we already have an internet business that we need to offer to somebody to come and develop the fiber optics here in this town. Somebody's gonna make money doing that, they have. Well,
Yeah,
no,
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
People do things to make money.
yeah, well, that's, but we, you know, just to try to figure out how to get a commercial niche here.
You can have
Well, we
a
need
little
to
more
think more
extensive
about that.
commercial
And that's
areas
not-
and let the invisible hand take over.
No, hopefully the
Some
visioning
entrepreneur who
will
wants
hold
to.
us.
Okay, let's not start
Though it's hard
rehashing.
because we are competing with, like, I mean, we had a startup manufacturing business originally in Lyme, and we outgrew the original location. We looked at Earl's place, and that was a real possibility for us. But, you know, we ended up at the airport industrial park, because, you know, it's all set up for manufacturing.
The same thing happened with GDT. They were, you know,
Right.
they hit a
Yeah,
little over
it's-
125 employees, needed to expand, and didn't have the ability to expand in Lyme.
I think that's
Lyme,
part of the
everything was on
process,
such a
right?
tiny scale, I mean, you're talking
Yeah.
about just one or two
Yeah.
places where things can really happen. I think that's probably the real problem is that tiny little scale, which is also part of the problem of, you know, trying to figure out what the impacts of changes would be, because we do have it's very limited data, when you have, you know, 6 houses, being built a year, as opposed to 100 houses, but,
I'm sorry.
I mean, that was.
I think this is probably a good place to make an end to the discussion, and to the point of where do we go from here, from something I'd like to suggest in terms of the planning board is that we have discussions about, you know, what do we think is a good, do we wanna go ahead with the plan of the housing chapter and restrict it to that? Do we wanna shift to commercial? Do we wanna go through the whole master plan? I think we're certainly at a point where we wanna do some kind of visioning, and we should discuss and consider whether we wanna, you know, how wide or how narrow that should be, and get together, you know, start talking about maybe a group that would guide and lead the vision process, and that we should keep talking with you, and that even when we're not talking, if you wanna send it, you know, as to what you were saying, as you have ideas, creative ideas, either come see us or send them to us by our slow email or whatever, or snail mail, but keep feeding us whatever you think is important. So that's what I would suggest, at least from the planning board's point of view.
Okay, from our point of view, I think that we need to have 2 people from your group, 2 people from our group, somebody from the Lyme Foundation, somebody from those guys, any other organizations that you all can think of to put on a steering committee for the visioning.
CCL,
Community Cares of Lyme.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that at least within the board, and you can come up with your own list, but we would wanna think of who should be included on it.
I think you should try to find any people who live in town under the age of 25 and try to get them involved in that process too.
If you can.
If you find them.
Yeah, if you can find somebody under
Right.
the age of 25.
And to Vicky's thing, good luck. I mean, as much as I'd love to see people coming back, like, they're leaving New England, it's not Lyme,
Oh, I know, right.
so.
We're going to Boston.
But, you know, one thing I mean, I know from my nieces and the circle of people around them, that there are an awful lot of people who grew up in the Upper Valley, who go away for 10 years and, you know, realize that the rest of the world isn't like this and can't wait to come back.
Come back in the 30s.
And they're
Yeah,
coming
it's
back
like
10 to 15 years later with a lot of experience and a lot to contribute. And I think it's really important that we at least try to figure out a way to encourage that.
And that's, we gotta try to get as many of those in this as we can. I think that's gonna be the key to how you
That's
unlock
your
what's
job.
going forward. Yeah, I can't find them.
So, you know,
Sue, we've been
we
trying to
actually-
recruit them for the fire department.
We had a millennial, and we tried to actually tie him up. We had a millennial come to the millennial meeting, but he got away. But there are a few, but I know where he lives, and maybe we can get him.
Yeah.
He's in the Navy, yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, just, yeah.
Will
Will you give us 2 people from your group?
Well, we need to discuss, we're not gonna.
No, I don't mean right now, but I mean, you'll come up with 2 people?
We will, yes, we will give sacrificial lambs.
Okay, we'll come up with 2, and.
Niels, I don't know, please, we'll discuss it and we'll figure out whether it'll be 2 or 1 or 5 or whatever, but yes, we'll get the process rolling.
All right.
And can I just say, what's this group doing exactly?
Put a visioning.
To
group
do the
together.
visioning, okay.
Now, one thing to Chris, I thought you were gonna get into it. Our group has gone out and raised essentially $15,000 to pay a consultant, okay?
To do what?
To help with the visioning process. Okay, we haven't chosen anybody yet, but we thought we wanted to do that because I was frustrated working with these bureaucracies. Forgive me, I understand they did a good job. I haven't dealt with them. I dealt with one person, and it wasn't going in the right direction. So we could throw that and contribute that to the combined group to try to bring somebody in who knows how to
If you're
do this
offering us money, you've come to the right place.
I think he's offering
Chris,
something even better.
Chris is
And that is a person
subcommittee.
to help do all the work, do all of the organization, do the
Well, I think we would
services.
need to discuss who that, as you may have noticed, that there was disagreement about your preference for a person and Vicky's experience, so I think that's something we would need to work out. But we'd be delighted to have your money.
But you ain't gonna get it.
I figured once it push came to shove. Anyway, I really wanna thank you very much. It's often a difficult process, but we really appreciate your work and hope that we can come to some constructive outcomes for the town of Lyme. So thank you really very much. And thank you very much. It's so nice to see people come to a meeting because we're usually talking to ourselves. And we're gonna move on to the next stuff, so you're certainly welcome to stay. Are people here for we're gonna be going over the tree cutting, are anybody here for the tree cutting? No? No? Can I interest anybody in the tree cutting?
To do it, or?
I guess he's not coming, but. All right, so actually, let's go, let's do the, let's get our minutes.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Oh, you shouldn't have. You know, this is